Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR 96.3 HD2 and Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. If you are caring for a loved one, you are not alone. Caregiving in the U.S. is on the rise. The latest figures show that some 100 million adults function as caregivers, providing care for a child, a parent, a friend, or other relative. Well, my guests tonight say it is a crisis that is continuing to grow and yet is not being addressed. Well, tonight we will talk about the emotional, financial, and psychological impact on caregivers. And we will preview an upcoming event called Caring Out Loud, Caregivers Sharing Their Real Life Stories. My guests are Jennifer Morales, Director of Movement Learning and Culture Change at Family Values at Work. Rhonda Wilson, she's a caregiver for a friend. And Keopu Reelitz is a mother caring for a child. Ladies, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Sure thing. Let me first ask you, Jennifer, why this caregiving movement has become so serious, so intense. What is happening that we are hearing more about the caregiving culture right now?
Well, everybody gives and receives care at some point in our lives. So it's not new in that sense. But what is new is that our care economy is faltering. People are discovering that the systems and infrastructure that we have in place for care are not adequate, and that families are being crushed, asked to provide not only everyday work in the workforce, but also meet all the care needs of families. So that might be elder care, that might be care for people with disabilities, that might be care for young children. Regardless of the type of care, our country's infrastructure is really feeling the strain. So everything from daycare, it's not able to find staff or be able to pay their staff well, to home care aides being overworked and underpaid, to parents not able to find care for their children when they're sick. We are struggling, families are struggling. And I think it's not that anything has changed about the need for care, but it's about who's providing it, who's being asked to work in the workforce and still provide it without supports from the government.
When I was growing up, I remember in just about every household in my extended family and in the extended family of friends, there was always an older person who was ailing. Whether, like my great grandmother, who lived to be 99 years old, who eventually could not see. And she moved around. She was, her mouth was just as spicy at 99 as it probably was at 29. But she was 99 years old. And, my great aunt and my great uncle, they took care of her. That's just kind of what we did. So why do you think now is any different?
Well, to be very frank, a lot of the care that has happened in the past was invisible and kept invisible, I would say on purpose. Things that you keep invisible, you don't have to pay for or support in any way. So the care of, let's go back several hundred years, the care provided by enslaved folks was made invisible. It was, white business people are so prosperous and capable, but what's actually keeping their businesses and households running is coerced labor, right? Same thing with women and immigrant workers, people who are providing care in homes, people who are providing care that lasts generations. are made invisible. Now these caregivers are out front. They're in the workforce. We're demanding fair pay for the work that we do. This is new in that regard. So yes, that family care has always been there, but our economy demands that most of us are out in the workforce in some way. And now we're saying, look, if you want us to support the world's strongest economy and provide that care, somebody better be helping us pay for it. Somebody better be making our policies workable for working families with things like paid family and medical leave and paid sick and safe days and affordable childcare. So we need our government to step up. We need our employers to step up to support the demands that are new that they're making on working families.
Rhonda, share with us briefly your caregiver story. Who are you taking care of?
Well, in my situation, it was a newfound friend, and I relocated. I'm from Connecticut area originally, born and raised. So I relocated down to Atlanta, and I knew a few people, old college friends already, but you know, everybody's working, doing their own thing and spread out. And I found myself in a situation where I befriended a small group of ladies, but we really didn't know each other like that. I mean, it was probably like a month of us kind of hanging out, talking to each other, when one of the friends actually ended up having a brain aneurysm.
Mm.
And that was kind of like a moment where we all had to, you know, come to some kind of decision, like, are we going to help or are we just all going to disappear? And that was a question, well, that was more of a conversation that we had because we were all single. We're all starting on these new great jobs in brand new states, in a brand new state. And none of us had family around. We couldn't call anybody to say, hey, you know, come and check on your person kind of thing. That wasn't a choice. So that's one of those things where it's like, are you going to do something or just going to walk away and leave her?
Mm-hmm. How long have you been taking care of her? And is it just you, or is this a kind of collective of those friends?
It was 4 of us in total, and the one friend was in a hospital. So the 3 of us, we came up with a schedule and, you know, was taking care of her back and forth. And it was only supposed to be about a 2-month hospital stay, but because of other circumstances with, you know, locating her family and, you know, trying to get people to come and take care of the situation, she ended up staying in the hospital almost 4 months total. Yeah. And we kept that schedule up like every day. Like if someone couldn't go one day, someone else stepped in. Someone was having car trouble. Okay, well, I could go today for a few hours. So there was not a break, or no one of us in our group was like, well, I'm tired. I don't want to be bothered. Like everybody just kept going. We still kept, you know, helping her out.
Keopu, what is your caregiver situation?
So I am a mom of 3 young boys. So
God bless you for that.
thank you.
I was a young boy at one time. So you've already thank you for the interview. I already know where you are.
Exactly. I usually say that, and then folks say no more. But the story I'll be sharing is what happened after I gave birth to our first son. And during that time, because of things happening between my husband and I, and our financial situation, I couldn't afford to take any of my FMLA, my maternity leave unpaid. And so I was actually back in the office at least part-time within a month of giving birth to my son. And I thought everything was fine, but well, the story talks about how everything wasn't all that fine, actually, and really what it felt like to miss out on a lot of the parts of caregiving that I wanted to actually participate in, but couldn't because it financially wasn't going to work for us.
I do want to ask you more about that in great detail, because that we are talking about, a child, mind you, your own child, as opposed to, someone. I'm assuming that your first child, for example, is in good health.
Yes, for the most part, he has been. Yes.
Okay. So I do want to drill down a little bit more about that, as well as the situation with Rhonda's circle of caregiving, which I also think is quite laudable, because honestly, a lot of people would not do that. But before we talk about that, I do want to hear more about this event that is coming up tomorrow. Jennifer, can you share what's going to happen tomorrow, where it's going to be, and what is the purpose of this event?
Sure. So the event's called Caring Out Loud, and it's a night of autobiographical stories we'll have 6 caregivers telling their stories about care and caregiving. It will be at 6 p.m. at the Martin Luther King Jr. Library. The show starts at 6:30, but we're encouraging people to show up early to interact with an art installation we'll have there, get some refreshments, and then come into the theater and listen to these stories. What we're hoping will happen is that when people sit down and relate to each other through personal narrative, through the stories about our life experiences, there's an emotional connection, there's a building of empathy, and that's key. If we want to make change in this culture to get people to start moving for policies that will support families and caregivers, then we really need people to feel an emotional connection to that movement. The other thing that it does is it helps us feel like maybe we see something of ourselves in that other person's story, and we start thinking about ourselves as givers and receivers of care. And it's so important for us to do that as a first step, because like I was saying earlier, in our culture, in the structure of our economy, care is made invisible. And that's important, and that's on purpose. It's made invisible because that makes all the inconveniences of being human more convenient for our bosses, for systems that need to keep running. In an ideal capitalist system, we would all be showing up to work even though we're horribly sick. We just ignore signs in our bodies. We'd ignore the suffering of our families. We would just show up to work and just put in our shift, right? But that's not how a humane economy should work. It's not how a caring society should work, right? We want people to notice all the ways that we are giving and receiving care so that we can start developing the muscle to push back and say, no, I am a human being and I need these systems to work for me. And I need these systems to work for all of us so we all can thrive. So that seems like a big ambition for a little storytelling event. but that's the core of it. That's the literal heart of it. We want people to feel an emotional connection and I begin to identify with those identities of caregiver and care receiver and join our movement.
We will be talking more about that during the next segment of the program, but we are going to take a break. We want to remind our listeners, do not forget you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on our website, WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm is next on WHUR-FM. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141, 96 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation tonight about the culture of caregiving. My guests are Jennifer Morales, Director of Movement, Learning, and Culture Change at Family Values at Work. Rhonda Wilson, she's a caregiver for a friend. And Keopu Realis, she is a mother caring for a child. Before the break, I did say that I wanted to kind of drill down a little bit more about this. And I think that, Jennifer, you may be able to explain this, a little bit better for those who are not part of the caregiving culture and may be challenged to understand. So we already have family medical leave. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what it is that you are advocating for is something beyond that to help with the caregiving crisis that we see growing in the country.
Yeah, there are a lot of parts. So in Washington, D.C., you do have a paid family and medical leave policy, but most states don't. We're only at 14 states and D.C. that have a paid family and medical leave state program. We're still working to win in a critical mass of states so that we can build pressure for a federal policy that would cover all people in the United States. So paid family medical leave covers like longer term needs. So giving birth to a baby or adopting a child, recovering from surgery. So things that happen that require you to take care time in weeks or months. We're also advocating for paid sick and safe days, which are shorter periods of time, more like days that can cover needs around like acute illnesses like COVID or the flu, or taking a kid to a doctor's appointment. Safe leave covers things like when you need to seek legal or medical help around domestic violence or sexual assault or stalking. And then we're also advocating for affordable childcare, including a childcare system in which the childcare workers are paid a livable wage, because right now the only way that our childcare infrastructure is holding together is by paying folks very minimal wages. Same with elder care and with home care services, which are another critical piece of the care economy. Those workers are often very poorly paid. They have high caseloads and often, are doing physically hazardous work for very little pay and often very few benefits, if any benefits. So we really want to see an overhaul of the entire care economy so that all this critical care that's being provided, that is absolutely undergirding everything else we do, our education system, our workforce, all of that is well supported, well funded, and that families can afford to thrive. So it's a big dream.
So Keopu, let me ask you this, because let's say for the sake of argument that you are working for an organization or a business that has maternity leave, family medical leave, but just from the position of an employer, it's one thing to have, sick leave if your child gets sick. But if your child is healthy and you decide that you want to spend more time with your child in those very early years, what is the difference between child care and caregiving for a child?
Oh, that's a big question. So I am originally, I'm from Hawaii, and as part of the Native Hawaiian community, one of the things that we see by and large is one of the biggest financial strains for our families, our Native Hawaiian families, is our ability to care for our keiki and kupuna, our kids and our elders. And sometimes that means that we ourselves are caring for them. Sometimes that means that we're having other folks care for them. I will tell you that one of the reasons that we decided, so in my story, you might hear that my husband we chose for him to become a stay-at-home dad. The reason he was a full-time caregiver was because we literally were going to give away our entire paycheck for childcare. And so we essentially were forced to not have a choice but to go that route. We were lucky that by the time we had our third son, we were in different positions, and we actually had choices. And I think the biggest thing for me in the advocacy that I've been involved in is making sure that families have the access to choices, to whether that's for having somebody outside of the home care for our keiki, our children, or if it's from being able for myself to be there. I know that when it comes to having kids, the difference between the employer I had in my first with my first child to the employer I had with my third child, and that situation was in the third instance, I had a lot more support. And in that realm, I felt like I was an even better and more dedicated worker, because I knew that when I took time off to devote to my kids and to make sure that I had the time to bond with my and care for, quite frankly, because by the time of the third came around, I was actually working from home, and he was home working full time with me. So lots of people knew who my baby was as much as they knew me, right? And so I think for me, it's really just making sure that we have the options, because by the third child, we didn't have to. We weren't forced into a corner. The only reason we were forced into a corner in some ways is that there wasn't available infant and toddler childcare. And there wasn't available infant and toddler childcare because there wasn't enough. And there generally isn't enough infant and toddler childcare because we don't pay our childcare workers enough, particularly for the youngest kids. And I think one of the other things that's important for me in the advocacy and to share with folks, prior to the work I'm doing now professionally, I've spent quite a bit of years in the early childhood education advocacy front. And one of the things that I call them like my my mentors that were in classrooms, helped to embed in my knowledge base is that the most important thing for a child, particularly in their first 3 years, is having a solid, healthy relationship with at least one caregiver. And that can be a parent, that can be a grandparent, that can be a child care worker, whatever that looks like, the more the better. But if we're talking about setting kids up for success for the long term, we're actually looking at having that key connection between a parent and an adult that is going to set them up for success, and in turn will set families up for success. Having those choices allows us to have the ability to dream, to have the ability to think that we can thrive, as Jennifer was talking about, to believe that that is possible for us, and that we don't have to be constrained by who's going to pick up our kid by 2 p.m. or if we're going to be able to make rent and our, in Hawaii, $2,000 a month infant childcare tuition.
I guess, at the risk of getting into a semantical discussion, what is the difference between being a parent and being a caregiver to your child?
Well, I mean, parent.
Because as a father, okay, of a now adult, and maybe this is the evolution of this issue, I never considered myself a caregiver. I considered myself a parent. Even when my daughter developed type 1 diabetes, I never considered myself a caregiver. I considered that all things that were responsible for my child's health and welfare came under the title of parent.
Well, and you say a parent is one type of caregiver.
Well, I'm speaking just in this particular case of children, because I do want to talk more about the caregiving aspect for those that are not our children. But I'm speaking specifically of the whole parent versus child caregiver, because I think that playing the devil's advocate here, a lot of parents will say, hey, we just did what we had to do because we love our kids.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that, anybody could be a caregiver for a child, but we give the word parent to the people generally who either gave birth to that child or who adopted that child, right? But I think the distinction that we like to make is more around the act of care itself. So the idea that, titles define who can provide care or receive care is very narrow, and it doesn't actually reflect people's experiences. Like, think about during COVID when, there were often travel restrictions. There were a lot of people who couldn't travel to see their biological family, and people started calling on other relationships, whether that was your next door neighbor or it was some friends who lived nearby. Like, suddenly it became really important for us to say all these types of people are actually kind of family. They're family in a different way. So we're less hung up on the title that anybody has than the actual act of giving or receiving care, and whether that act is supported by our society as a whole, by our economy as a whole.
Rhonda, talk to me about the cost of this humane act. That's the only way that I can really describe it for you and your circle of friends in taking care of this friend who is ailing. I can't imagine what impact that would have on you, financially, and the emotional cost for you. You, like you said, you went to Atlanta to get a new job and to live your best life.
Yeah. I mean, it in my mind, it was just it costed us time. It was time. That's all. I mean, yeah, time goes by. Yeah, I mean, we spent money on gas. I speak highly of Emory because they provided us, money for parking. They provided
Emory University Hospital.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Mhm.
Yeah. And so that I think they sensed as well that our friend was alone, that we were all alone, and that they were trying to assist in some way to chip in a little bit, and we didn't all know each other's financial situations either. We weren't requiring anything of one another in that way. It was just, okay, you're going to be here this time, you're going to be here this time. And we adhered to it. No one ever spoke up saying like, hey guys, I need gas money or I don't have any food. Like, no one ever said that. If anything, we were bringing things to the hospital. We were bringing snacks, bringing food and trading it with each other, leaving it in the room, and the nurses were adding to it. So I don't know, to me, that kind of stuff, money comes and goes. I can get gas. I can get another car. Like, who cares?
So, but in your situation, and how long have you been helping to take care of this friend?
It was almost 4 months, 3 to 4 months of doing it.
How is she now?
Somebody had asked me that a couple weeks ago. We stayed in touch for a couple of years after that. And we kind of lost touch because, she went back to Houston with her daughter. But right after that, she was still kind of slowly recovering, had her motor functions and all that. She was getting better. But yeah, that was like the last time like we really spoke. She texted me a couple times just checking up, like, hey, how you doing? And I'm like, you too, kind of thing. But and then she asked me if I spoke to the other ladies. The other ladies actually moved away out of state. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So when you look back at that 4-month period, which when someone looks at the context of this conversation, someone will say, well, it was only 4 months, but I'm sure for her while she was in it and for you while you were in it, it was day to day. You didn't know how it was going to be. What when you look back, what did you require of your job that you don't believe you received? What do you think could have been done better? And what would you say to employers for other people who find themselves in a similar circumstance?
Well, I remember communication was huge. I provided plenty of communication, letting them know, my manager know what exactly I was dealing with, that I was going to be there. Sometimes they did require overtime, but the thing was they didn't understand when I could not do that overtime in that small window. So just allowing a little bit of grace, because I started to receive some really negative language, like, why are you doing that? You don't know her. And these are from managers. So I was a little taken aback by that. So just having open communication definitely is one. It started to kind of feel a little bit harassing. And that's when I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit more and realized that there weren't really any workplace kind of protection laws in Georgia as far as like harassment, toxic workplace, things like that. So it was a lot of unfolding at that time period. So,
And now you're an activist.
Yeah, as a result.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the very foundation of this conversation, Jennifer, because I think that is a reality for businesses, whether you are working for a for-profit business, nonprofit. If you're just working, at some point, the boss may go from, "Hey, how are things going? How is your friend doing? How are things going? How are you doing?" to, "Are you coming to work today?" And I think that from your perspective, Jennifer, how do you balance that, short of legislation codifying new rules around this kind of thing, or is that the only way? Because some businesses, as you remember, I'm sure, when it came to family medical leave, businesses pushed way back on that before that became a law in the states where it became a law. And asking for more may be an uphill climb for advocates such as yourself, Jennifer.
Yeah, well, we've been at this project for 20 years, so yeah, it is it's a long slog. We often say when people will push back and say, "Well, why don't we just make it voluntary?" I ask, how many people do you know who have been like in Rhonda's situation, or many of the people we work with at our organization? Most employers won't do it on their own. So setting a universal floor for all employers would make all the difference. So, the Family Act, which is a federal proposal, would give every worker 12 weeks of paid leave. And we consider that a floor. And then if employers can do better than that, or states can do better than that with their own programs, that's really great. The cost is often shared between the employer and the employee. So everybody's putting in a little bit on each paycheck. And then that all goes into a big pool. And when people need it, they draw on it. And if they don't need it, they don't draw on it. And so it's just there as like an insurance plan for the very human things that happen to us. And one of the things that we talk about is just the unpredictability of becoming a caregiver. We don't know. Like Rhonda didn't know when she made this friend on meetup.com that, she would be one of her primary caregivers a month later. And another one of our storytellers will tell a story about a death that happened in the family, and suddenly his role as an uncle became more than a title. It became a day-to-day job duty for him. So, the unpredictability of it is inherent in our humanness. And as long as employers are employing humans, we need to make room for that unpredictability, right? We need to make room for people to be sick, for people to have babies, for people to need to care for elderly parents. We need to make the room. And I don't think that's negotiable.
Mm-hmm. Keopu, how and when did your situation change? Was it after baby number 2, number 3, number 4?
I'm not going for 4. I just want to make it clear. 3 is enough.
Oh, 3. Okay, I don't know why I had in my mind that there was a 4th child.
So I as listening to Jennifer and Rhonda, what's interesting is I had my second child completely depleted, did very similarly, but I had already banked enough vacation and sick leave to take a bit more time. And so I gave birth to him, and then within 6 months, he ended up in the ICU and was in and out of the hospital for a month. And during that time, this is not the story I will share tomorrow, but it is a story I've shared with folks here. During that time, my employer called me back to the office and wanted to fix my leave. And I was like, I don't care. My kid is gonna die. Like, I almost watched.
When you say fix your leave,
there were
What
issues.
does that mean?
There were issues with my leave, and so they needed to reconcile it if I wanted to make any more paid leave. Mm-hmm. And because of the situation, I work for a government employer, for the financial, I unfortunately had it where if you take unpaid leave, it impacts your healthcare insurance. I would have had to pay even more than I was already paying for healthcare insurance for a family of 4 at that point, and I would have had to risk some like retirement and pension benefits. So there was actually penalties that I would have had to pay if I didn't come and fix my leave. And I remember sitting in my boss's office and just being like, are you kidding me? My concern at that moment was that my son, who essentially just hit everything. I still remember the beeps in the hospital with everything going off, his blood sugar going down, his heart rate going down. I just imagined that happening while I was sitting, literally going over a calendar to reconcile my leave to make sure I could take more paid leave, so I wasn't going to be having those penalties play out. And so that, I think, I had already started to lean into, because of the experience we had after my first, to lean into advocating for these kinds of policies and investments that we've been talking about. But it was after the second that I just said, I can't do this anymore. I have to work for places that are going to value who I am and that are going to value me as a parent and as a caregiver. And that if you see that as a value, then I will bring that plus $1 million, and that will pay forward, and I will be dedicated to you as an employee. And so it was after that. So funny enough, after that experience, it was right after my son finally got out of the hospital. I applied for a new job, and that's how I got into early childhood education advocacy.
Okay. And as a result of that medical crisis for that particular son, how is he doing?
He's doing well. We expected everything. We were expecting sort of a lifelong sort of impacts with asthma, because it was a respiratory virus, but we were very guarded during the pandemic, and so I think that gave our family a little bit of time for him to allow him to recover. So he's doing well now. But in our third son, he has had some medical interventions, not nearly as serious as our second son. But I made sure, again, if I was going to work for somebody, that they were going to if my son was in surgery or in the hospital, any one of the three, that they were going to support me doing that. And that was a non-negotiable, and something that I just decided I was going to fight for individually. And then for friends who have, obviously because I've entered the advocacy space, I talk with a lot of friends who are parents and caregivers. And quite frankly, now that I think about it, quite a bit of them are taking care of their elders, taking care of their kupuna, and they face similar concerns about like what happens if I take too much time or I don't have enough. And so they'll come to me, and I'll walk them through to the extent I can, and hand them off to folks who can help them navigate the leave situation to the best of their ability, and to advocate and know where the boundaries are. I was lucky enough to have some of those folks in my corner already with my first son, which I carried through my three sons, that I knew when to say, it doesn't matter what you think, boss. That's actually illegal for you to ask of me. So we're going to end this conversation and we're going to continue on. And, I did it, I have that way about me, so I just laughed it off and I continued on, and that's the key. Not everyone has that kind of confidence. I was equipped with some really good advocates in my corner from the very beginning, and I try to play that forth for others in my life.
Rhonda, what did you learn from this experience as a caregiver?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I definitely learned that, there's others out there that are in my situation that don't have family in close proximity in case anything ever happens. So just learning like that it's okay to have, chosen family, a new community that is actually willing to help, and vice versa. Like I shared with the other ladies, last year I had a medical crisis of my own and found myself alone because majority of people that I would call on, like during COVID, neighbors, we kind of did this looking out for each other thing. A few of them, soon as COVID was over, they sold their places and left. So last year I found myself by myself, and I reached out to a friend who was in South Carolina, and he's in a similar situation. And I was apprehensive about even asking, but I did. And before I'll be right there. And he did. And he stayed with me for a week and took care of my house, took care of my dog, took care of me. And, and thank God his job was flexible because he worked remote. And there were a couple of days where he had to step away because I heard him on the phone, hey, I can't log in today. And they didn't give him any pushback. Yeah. So,
Jennifer, I'll let you have the last 30 seconds for some final thoughts about this.
Well, I want to encourage people to come to the show tomorrow, September 13th at 6 p.m. at the MLK Library. It's free. And I want to also encourage people, even if you can't make it, think about your own care stories. Everyone's got them, but we don't talk about them much. And make a commitment to tell somebody and ask them about their care story, because all of us are givers and receivers of care. And until we come to terms with that and how invisible and sidelined our care work has been made, we won't be able to change the culture. And if we don't change the culture, we can't change how our economy works in the ways that it's failing all of us.
I think that's a good place to end this particular conversation. Thank you all for sharing this important issue and your experiences with us. And certainly this will not be the last conversation to be had about this. Ladies, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, September 12th. I'm Harold Fisher.